Additional funding was provided by Symbolics, Inc., a major manufacturer of symbolic processing systems for developing and running complex software, and by these companies and foundations.
Oh, what a day. On the way home, I was sitting at a stoplight and some jerk plowed right into me. I'm okay, but it's going to cost a fortune to fix the car. At least I have insurance. You know, it's a wonder that insurance companies stay in business when they've got to deal with things as unpredictable as car accidents. They survive by taking advantage of a statistical concept we'll learn about in this program, the law of large numbers. We'll also learn rules for adding and multiplying the means and variances of random variables. We'll meet one of the most widespread types of probability distributions, the binomial distribution. And we'll learn simple ways to calculate the mean and standard deviation of binomial distributions. Insurance companies deal in all kinds of random events, fires, floods, car accidents. The companies can't predict when someone will file a claim. But if the pool of policyholders is big enough, they can predict accident rates with surprising accuracy. This is like coin flipping. We can't predict the next outcome, but we can predict a long-term pattern. The law of large numbers is a way of defining this phenomenon. Since we know the probability of getting ahead is 50-50 on every toss, if we flip 4 coins many times, the mean number of heads will approach 2 in the long run. And that's what the law of large numbers says. Stated formally, the law says that the mean result of a large number of independent trials comes close to the true mean of a distribution. Now, many people expect even short sequences to have the same regular pattern that's predicted for the long term. But we know that's not always the case. For example, because of random variation, it's possible to get 4 heads out of 4 coin tosses. But people don't understand randomness very well, and so when strings like that happen, they think it's meaningful. This misperception is called the myth of small numbers. You can find those who believe it, as well as those who've challenged it with scientific research in the world of basketball.
Once you get a streak going, it just seems like you can hit a shot with your eyes closed.
It's a great feeling, and when everything is going right, you know, there's no feeling like it.
When you experience success, that it breeds more success, and you make a couple shots or spectacular plays, and you just feel it coming, and you just feel that, hey, there's no way I can miss tonight.
2 minutes.
Players believe that you make several shots, you feel confident, you become relaxed, you get in a groove, and almost any shot you're going to put up is going to go in. Players describe it as the basket seems huge. Our empirical question is that the case? If you've made several shots in a row, are you more likely to then make your next 1, 2, or 3 shots than if you've missed several shots in a row? We started with the simplest step first, was to just get a hold of the field goal statistics from all games played, or at least all home games, from the Philadelphia 76ers during a real NBA season. And we just looked at the distribution of hits and misses. Does making a shot tend to make you ever so slightly more likely to make your next shot? There is no positive correlation between successive shots. In fact, there's a slight negative correlation. And what that means, translated into a more intuitive statistic, is that the probability of making a shot after having just made your shot isn't greater than after having just missed your shot, which is contrary to what all basketball players, and in fact what I believed up until that time. Now you might argue that, well, maybe there's something like a hot hand that exists, but it's masked by a bunch of other things and it just doesn't show up in the data. For example, maybe it's the case that a hot player takes more difficult shots. So the player would be more likely to make a shot of given difficulty, but that is perfectly covered up by the fact that they're taking more difficult shots. So we've got 2 things going on that work in the opposite direction. Free throws in many ways provides us with a natural experiment to examine that very question, because they are usually shot in pairs. They're always shot from exactly the same distance, so there's no change in the difficulty of the shot. And there's no defensive pressure. And we look at 2 full seasons of Boston Celtic free throw statistics, and we find players are not any more likely to make their second shot after making or missing their first. The outcome of the second shot is independent of the first shot. Some people object to this research by saying that we're dismissing basketball as nothing but chance, and nothing could be further from the truth. This does not in any way take away from the beauty or complexity of the game.
Unlike basketball, in statistics, it's the long term we care about. The law of large numbers helps us calculate long-term outcomes of random variables. In many cases, it's important to be able to combine information from 2 random variables. Suppose for a minute that we've just won the lottery and we're faced with the pleasant task of deciding how to invest the fortune. For simplicity's sake, we'll decide whether to put the money into the stock market or U.S. government treasury bills. Since the rates of return on stocks and T-bills vary unpredictably over time, it's not easy to decide. Let's take a close look at each option. Here's a relative frequency histogram for the average rate of return on common stocks over the past 30 years. We'll call this random variable X. You can tell immediately that the variation is wide, from a loss of 15% to a gain of 43%. You can also see that the mean is relatively high, about 14%. Now here's the distribution for the rate of return on T-bills. We'll call this random variable Y. The variance is much smaller. In fact, not once in 30 years did people lose money in T-bills. But the mean is also smaller, about 6%. Now, since we've heard that we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket, we'll decide to put half our fortune in stocks and half in T-bills. What rate of return can we expect? That's the same as asking, what is the mean of the sum of 2 random variables? Before we do that, let's learn some basic rules. The formula for the first one looks like this. It shows that adding any number a to all the values of the random variable x gives you the same mean as adding a to the mean of x. Likewise, multiplying all the values of x by any number b gives you the same mean as multiplying the mean of x by b. In other words, if you add or multiply all values of a random variable by the same number, you simply add or multiply the mean by the same amount. Of course, the same is true for subtraction or division. The second rule says that the mean of the sum of the random variables x and y equals the mean of x plus the mean of y. We'll use both rules in finding the expected rate of return on the investment of our fortune. Since we divided our money in half, the rate of return we get is 1/2 x plus 1/2 y. The mean rate of return for the combined investment is 1/2 the mean of x, stocks, plus 1/2 the mean of y, T-bills. That's 1/2 times 0.14 plus 1/2 times 0.06, which gives us a combined rate of return of 0.1 or 10%. That relatively simple calculation illustrates both our rules. First, we multiplied each of 2 random variables by a constant. In this case, both the constants were 1/2, and then we added the resulting products. Now, why not just put the whole wad into the investment with the highest return? Well, there's a little more to it than that.
The New York Stock Exchange is home to some of the world's most serious investors.
2 and 8 sold. 2 trades at 6. Houston sells 2 at $60. 1,500 Bristol trades at 7/8.
Wheaton College is also home to some serious investors. Well, pretty serious. Most of them are found in John Gilday's corporate finance class.
You're each going to have $10,000 to invest. Okay, and we're going to play this game for 2 months. And whoever finishes with the most money after 2 months gets an optional final. Might not seem like a lot now, but come Christmas time when all your friends are shopping and you're sitting here studying for a corporate exam, it's going to seem like a lot then. So
In Professor Gilday's investment game, there is only one restriction. Students must put their money in at least 3 of the 5 different types of markets: stocks, mutual funds, foreign exchange, commodities, or a money market fund. Halfway through the semester, they can change strategies, selling part or all of their old portfolios and buying new ones. Before the students begin planning their strategies, Professor Gilday gives them some advice about diversification.
Another investment might be perfectly negatively correlated with this stock or this investment and have a return that looks like this. So if the game were to end at time period 1, you would want to be up here. You would want to be holding with stock B or investment B. You don't want to be down here. You don't want to be in investment A. So if you don't want to take a chance on either being up here or down here, what you could do is diversify. Put half your money in investment A, half your money in investment B, so that your expected return, do this in a different color here, is going to be in between there. It's going to look like this. It's not going to have any risk involved because these 2 investments are perfectly negatively correlated. When one goes up, the other goes down. The expected return is going to be the average of those 2.
So within each of the markets that they invested in, students had a choice. They could diversify and play it safe, or they could put all their eggs in one basket, taking the risk of either winning big or losing big. It is 1 month into the contest. Betsy and Michelle are evaluating their initial investment strategies and deciding what they'll change.
I think I'm going to sell wheat because that's gone way down since we invested in everything and reinvesting in stocks. I didn't do well. You know, you should invest in currencies. Yeah. Foreign currencies, because I bought the Swiss franc and I bought the yen and they went up. I'm not keeping all 4,000.
Betsy had initially put a lot of her money in government bonds, in platinum, and in wheat. Now she's thinking about investing more heavily in the currency market.
Forward here. That means I don't think my portfolio is really well balanced. I think I've gotten more risky than other people in the class. I stand to lose a lot of money if the market turns against me. And if it doesn't, then I'll do really well.
It's the end of the semester. Many strategies have been tried. Most have failed.
I put my money in 3 different stocks, 3 different funds, and the money market. I didn't diversify all that much, but I did a little bit. I lost $350.
I diversified a lot. I put my money in 20 different stocks, in 2 commodities, and in mutual funds.
How'd you do?
I lost $200. I lost the most out of everybody. I lost about $600.
If you had all your money in the American Stock Exchange, that index was 301.63.
The reason diversifiers and non-diversifiers alike lost money is that the stock market in general did poorly during these 2 months.
Wasn't a good time to be in the stock market.
But another pattern was noticeable. Neither the big winners nor the big losers diversified their investments. Most people in the middle, on the other hand, did diversify. They had less risk, and they tended to do what the market did, go down a little. Betsy, with her risky portfolio, came out ahead.
The winner was Betsy. We all started out with $10,000. Betsy ended up with $10,342.95.
Going into the second period of investing, I was behind a few people, and I didn't expect to catch up. I'm pretty glad I did. I don't have to take the final now.
What did Professor Gilday mean when he talked about the risk of different investments? Risk in this case translates into variation. The rate of return on stocks, for example, fluctuates far more than for T-bills. Let's look at those 2 distributions again. Our measure of variation is sigma, the standard deviation. You can see that the sigma for the T-bill distribution is small, about 2%, but the sigma for the stocks is about 8%. Now we're going to learn some rules for working with the standard deviation of random variables. For simplicity, we're going to talk in terms of variance instead of standard deviation. After all, you can always get the standard deviation by taking the square root of the variance. The first rule is adding a fixed number to all the values of your variable has no effect on the variance. The equation says that if we create a new variable by adding a number a to a random variable x, The variance of this new variable is the same as the variance of x. The second rule is that multiplying all values does change the spread. If we multiply x by b, the variance of this new variable is b squared times the variance of x. That's because the variance is the average squared deviation of the x values from their mean. Finally, the variance of the sum of the independent random variables x and y equals the variance of x plus the variance of y. If the variables are dependent, the situation becomes more complex, and the simple addition rule doesn't apply. The rules for means and variances apply to any probability distribution. That's very helpful, but one type of distribution occurs much more frequently than others and deserves special attention. A great many situations involve repeated trials in which there are only two possible outcomes. For example, coin flips or yes-no responses in opinion polls. In such cases, it's traditional to call one outcome a success and one a failure. We're usually interested in counting the number of successes or failures. The distribution of counts like these forms a specific type of discrete probability distribution, the binomial distribution. Binomial distributions are easy to spot once you know these distinguishing traits. There should be only two possible outcomes. In addition, there should be a fixed number of independent trials, and each trial should have the same probability of a success. The conditions for binomial distributions may seem awfully restrictive, but actually these distributions are quite common. For example, in looking at how many children in a family will inherit a genetic disease.
Shannon Leslie and his mother Luanda have come to the hospital for a checkup. Shannon has sickle cell anemia, a genetic blood disease that strikes 1 in 400 newborn black children in the U.S.
Have you had to miss any days from school?
Yeah.
Yeah, how many?
3.
The disease causes great pain, life-threatening pneumonia, and chronic organ damage and failure. There is no cure, only treatment for the symptoms. In sickle cell anemia, the normally round red blood cells are distorted into sickle shapes, which keeps them from carrying critical oxygen through the body. Like all genetically determined traits, the two genes that carry messages for the red blood cell are inherited, one from each parent. Normal blood cells have two A genes. Sickled cells have two S genes. In families like Shannon's, the parents have one copy of each. Although they are trait carriers, they do not have the disease. Each of their children, however, has a 1 in 4, or 25% chance of receiving both S genes. There is a 75% chance of inheriting any of 3 other combinations and not getting the disease. This fits the binomial mold. Each child inherits the disease or is well. Because the parent's genetic makeup never changes, these odds are constant for each pregnancy. Many trait carriers, though, are unaware of the risks they face.
Since the individuals who carry the trait are totally asymptomatic, have no anemia, have no clinical problems, they would never know they were carrying the trait unless somebody was specifically looking for it. The reason that it's important for people with sickle trait to know that they do is because they need to know whether or not a child that they are going to have is a candidate for having sickle cell anemia. Any complaints?
Nope.
Okay. Any suggestions?
No.
You want to get out of here?
Yeah.
Luanda and her husband Willie didn't know they were trait carriers until their second child, Sharonda, was diagnosed with sickle cell as an infant. Now they have 6 children. Sharonda, Shannon, and Shane all have sickle cell.
It's really hard to explain. It's just something, like any mother or any parent, when you know that your child has an illness or whatever, it's always going to be on your mind. I can see the character in my children. I can see them becoming more loving to one another. I can see them becoming responsible.
What does focus mean? You don't focus on no work at school.
Even through the pain, they would talk, laugh, even through the pain. So I said, Lord, I thank you. It wasn't a bad deal after all.
When starting their family, the Leslies had no experience with the statistics of sickle cell. Today, increased screening is identifying more couples like the Leslies, and genetic counseling is helping them to face the consequence of their genetic makeup.
The circus ponies are carrying sign. What sign?
Michael and Marie have one child with sickle cell and one without. They've come to counseling to evaluate their future odds.
Sean has sickle cell disease. My daughter doesn't have sickle cell disease, and well, any of my other kids have sickle cell, because Taisha came out all right.
Since you know by having a child with sickle cell disease that you're both carriers for sickle cell trait, you know there'd be a 75% chance that the child would not have.
It's hard for people to understand that one child's outcome doesn't affect the odds for the next. That's why counseling plays an important role in a couple's chance to make informed decisions. The statistics provide the factual understanding, but it's up to the individuals to decide how to use and interpret the numbers.
Nobody should be giving any kind of directed counseling or making a decision for them, because nobody, no health professional, nobody but the two people involved really know what's best for them.
The genetic counselor has the responsibility for making sure that the couple understands something about the statistics, knows how to work with those numbers and how they apply to their particular situation, and in sharing in the couple's feelings about themselves, about childbearing, about the future, what it will hold, and when those two important elements are brought together successfully, then the couple can really reach an informed decision that emotionally is good for them and will be good for a future child of theirs.
Give yourself a hand. Yay! You have to clap for yourself. You did great.
The genetic situation in the Leslie family fits the binomial distribution. There are only two possible outcomes, a sick or healthy child, and the outcome for each child is independent. We know that the probability of having a child with sickle cell disease, if both parents are carriers, is 0.25. We'll look at a probability histogram of sickle cell anemia in families with 6 children. Binomial probabilities are calculated with a complicated formula, but you don't have to worry about the arithmetic. The y-axis of our histogram is probability, and the x-axis is the number of sickle cell children in a family. The axis runs from no children with sickle cell to all 6 having the disease. It's easy to read this histogram. The probability of having 3 children with the disease, for example, is 13%. But public health planners also need to know the mean of the distribution. Fortunately, that's a piece of cake. The mean mu is simply the number of trials times the probability of an individual trial. In our example, in other words, the mean is 6 times 0.25, or 1.5. That's the mean number of sickle cell cases in families with 6 children, where both parents are carriers. Finding the standard deviation of a binomial distribution is also a snap. Here's the formula. Multiply the number of trials n by the probability of a success on a single trial, p, and 1 minus that probability, 1 minus p. That gives us the variance. So to get the standard deviation, we take the square root of the whole thing. In families of 6 children, then, we need to take the square root of 6 times 0.25 times 0.75, which equals 1.06. This binomial distribution has a mean of 1.5 and a standard deviation of 1.06. The rules for finding the mean and standard deviation of binomial distributions are very handy. Just remember that they're only good for binomial distributions. Now, as I said, you can calculate probabilities for specific outcomes in a binomial distribution using the binomial formula. It turns out that there's another and easier way to calculate many binomial probabilities, but you really have to see it to believe it.
This strange apparatus has a strange name. It's called a quincunx, and it models the binomial distribution perfectly. Each time a ball hits a peg, there's only 2 ways it can go, left or right. It has a 50% chance of falling in either direction. The next row of pegs is independent. Again, the same odds apply. The balls make their way down the quincunx and finally into the bins, which record the total number of falls to the left and falls to the right. The balls in the far right bin, for example, fell to the right every time they hit a peg. There aren't many of them. The balls in the middle bin fell right half the time and left half the time. This bin has the most balls. Not too surprising, since we know that the probability of falling right or left is 50% at each peg. The shape here is looking awfully familiar. It's nearly normal. And the amazing thing is the quincunx will form this shape every time.
Binomial distributions are often nearly normal, and that means we can calculate probabilities using the tools we've already learned for working with normal distributions. Let's take a closer look at this distribution. The probability P of a ball falling one way or another off a peg is 0.5, and the number of rows of pegs is large. In general, when n is large, the binomial distribution will be close to normal regardless of what value P takes. The distribution will be nearly normal if P is 0.5, even if n is small. But for small n's, the distribution becomes more skewed as P gets closer to either 1 or 0. So when n is large, or when P is close to 0.5 in a binomial, you can generally use normal calculations to find probabilities. On top of that, you can use the two easy formulas we've learned to find the mean and variance of other binomial distributions. In this program, we've gone from the general to the specific, from the law of large numbers, which holds for all random distributions, to the binomial distribution, which describes a particular class of discrete random variables. Now, I've got to run. I have to get my car to the shop.